You're tuned in to Beyond the Known. In 1959, 9 experienced hikers set out into the northern Ural Mountains and never came back. Their journey ended in one of the most enduring cold case mysteries in modern history: an abandoned tent, strange tracks in the snow, and injuries that defied explanation. Welcome to Beyond the Known, where tonight we revisit the Dyatlov Pass Incident, a story that blends the stark realities of nature with possibilities that stretch far beyond it. We'll retrace the hikers' final days, examine the most compelling fringe theories from UFO encounters to hidden military experiments, and then weigh them against the latest scientific analysis to see where the truth might lie. It's a journey through a landscape of fear, speculation, and discovery, and it begins by walking the same path those 9 hikers took, step by step, into the frozen heart of the Ural Mountains. So let's set the scene. It's late January 1959. We have this group of 9 hikers, mostly students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. They're young, experienced, really enthusiastic about this trek.
Absolutely. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, just 23, but already quite capable. And their goal was a Torton Mountain. This wasn't just a weekend camping trip. It was a serious Category 3 expedition.
The highest certification at the time, right? Which means they needed to demonstrate real skill.
Exactly. Navigating tough terrain, enduring brutal winter conditions, and they were meticulous about it. Their diaries, the photos they took, they show a tight-knit group, very disciplined, following all the protocols. They knew what they were doing.
Or at least they thought they did.
Yeah.
Because they weren't novices heading into the wilderness unprepared.
Not at all. These were seasoned trekkers, well-equipped, fit, smart. Understanding their level of competence is, well, it's crucial because it makes what happened next so incredibly hard to fathom. They should have been able to handle almost anything the Urals threw at them.
And they'd even received a warning, hadn't they? From a forester they met earlier on.
They had. He apparently advised them strongly against crossing the Ural Ridge in winter, mentioned deep ravines, hidden snow pits, and these incredibly strong winds that could just blow people off their feet.
But Dyatlov pushed back. Confident they were prepared? Maybe a little too confident.
It certainly suggests a high degree of self-assurance, maybe bordering on, overconfidence. He felt their planning and experience put them above the usual risks that, locals might worry about. They were determined to meet this challenge.
Then, on January 28th, one member, Yuri, had to turn back.
That's right. Chronic back pain flared up. It seemed like just bad luck at the time, but his survival, his absence from the final tragedy, later made him a figure of, some unfounded speculation. But at that point, it just meant 9 continued on. 8 men, 1 woman.
And then comes February 1st, visibility drops, the weather turns nasty, and they somehow get off course.
Yes, the research indicates that worsening conditions likely led them astray. And instead of finding a more sheltered spot, maybe pushing towards the tree line, they make this really strange decision.
To camp on the open slope of Kolotsiakl.
Dead Mountain, as the local Mansi people call it. A bleak, exposed place offering almost no protection from the wind, the cold. It's a choice that even now is difficult to understand for such an experienced group. Why there?
And that decision sets the stage for everything that follows. They were due back around February 13th, but they never showed up.
No signal, no word. Concern grew, and eventually a formal search party was organized on the 19th, starting operations on the 20th. 5 days they searched in those brutal conditions.
Until February 26th, when they found the campsite.
And what they found wasn't just an empty camp, it was a scene of utter chaos. Deeply disturbing.
Describe it. What was the first thing they saw?
The tent, partially collapsed, buried in snow, but the poles were still kind of eerily standing upright. But the immediate shocking detail was this large, ragged tear in the side of the tent.
A tear, like an animal attack.
That might be the first thought, but no. Forensic analysis, looking closely under a microscope later, confirmed these cuts were made from the inside. Someone inside had frantically slashed their way out.
So they weren't attacked from outside. They were desperate to get out.
Precisely. Whatever happened, it made them flee their only shelter with such urgency they couldn't even use the entrance. They just cut their way free.
And their gear? Their winter clothes, boots? Surely they'd grab those.
Almost none of it. Most of their essential survival gear, food, heavy coats, boots, blankets, it was all still inside the tent, neatly arranged in some cases. It's as if they fled with only what they were wearing, perhaps in their sleeping bags.
Just vanished into the cold. Anything else found at the tent site?
A couple of odd details. A flashlight was found on top of the collapsed tent fabric. It was switched off, but it still worked when they tested it later. Another flashlight was found further down the slope, switched on, but the batteries were dead, like it had been left on, maybe dropped. during the flight.
So they fled, leaving everything behind. What about tracks? Did they leave any trail?
They did, and the tracks add another layer of strangeness. About 20 yards from the tent, on snow that had hardened, they found 9 sets of footprints.
9 sets, okay. That matches the number of hikers?
Yes, but these weren't prints from people wearing proper winter boots. Some were in socks, some had maybe one boot on, and some were completely barefoot.
Barefoot in the Ural winter. That's almost unbelievable.
It's incredibly hard to comprehend. The wind had obliterated any tracks closer to the tent, but the ones they could see, well, they suggested something odd. The pattern looked like they were walking calmly, almost in single file, heading down the slope.
Calmly. After cutting their way out of the tent? That doesn't add up.
It's a major contradiction, a panicked escape, followed by what looked like an orderly withdrawal. It confounded everyone. The track led downwards, about 500 meters, towards the edge of a nearby forest.
And in the forest, that's where they found the first bodies.
Yes, near a large cedar tree. The searchers found remnants of a small, hastily made fire, just some charred branches, really, not a proper campsite at all. And there, under the cedar, were the bodies of Georgy Krivonashenko and Yuri Doroshenko.
What condition were they in?
Horrific. They were severely underdressed for the lethal cold. Krivonashenko reportedly had only underwear on, some of it torn, his feet bare with snow packed between his toes. Doroshenko had a bit more undershirt, shirt, long underwear, socks, but his clothes were also badly shredded.
Shredded, like from an attack.
It wasn't clear initially, but it seemed more like desperate tearing, perhaps in confusion or maybe snagged on branches. They found broken cedar branches near them, up to 5 meters high on the tree, suggesting they'd tried, maybe desperately, to climb the tree or break off limbs for the fire. They even had matches sewn into their clothes, a standard precaution for experienced hikers, and it looked like they'd managed to use some.
A desperate final effort for warmth. So tragic. Where were the others found? The group leader, Dyatlov.
3 more bodies were found scattered between that cedar tree and the tent they'd fled. Igor Dyatlov himself, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. They were at different distances, between 300 and 630 meters from the tree.
Doing what? Were they heading back?
Their positions, the way they were found, suggested they were trying desperately to crawl or stagger back towards the tent, back towards shelter, as if the immediate threat, whatever it was, had maybe passed, and now the lethal cold was their main enemy.
And the cause of death for these 5?
The initial autopsies concluded that these first 5, plus a 6th found later, died primarily from hypothermia. The official cause was succumbing to the extreme cold.
Okay, so hypothermia for most.
Yeah.
But the mystery deepens significantly with the last 4 hikers, doesn't it? They weren't found for quite some time.
No, they weren't. For 2 long months, their fate was unknown. It wasn't until May, when the snow began to melt, that the searchers finally found them. Buried under about 4 meters, that's roughly 13 feet, of snow in a ravine, about 75 meters further into the woods from the cedar tree. This was Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, and Semyon Zolotaryov.
And their injuries.
Yeah.
This is where things get really bizarre, isn't it?
Extremely bizarre. Unlike the others who mainly succumbed to the cold, these 4 had suffered massive, brutal internal trauma.
What kind of trauma?
The autopsy reports described injuries consistent with, well, the kind of massive force you'd see in a high-speed car crash. We're talking multiple fractured ribs, severe internal hemorrhaging, crushed skulls. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles had extensive skull damage. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had major chest fractures.
But externally, were there signs of a fight or being hit?
That's the most baffling part. No, there were no significant external wounds corresponding to these massive internal injuries. No soft tissue damage that would indicate they were struck or attacked externally. It was as if they'd been subjected to an immense pressure, something that crushed them from within.
And Lyudmila Dubinina. There was something particularly gruesome found with her.
Yes. Her tongue was missing, along with some other soft tissues around her mouth and eyes. It's a detail that has fueled some of the wildest speculation over the years.
Understandably. What about Alexander Zolotaryov? You mentioned him having unusual tattoos.
He did. He was older than the students, 37, and had served in the military. The tattoos included things like a 5-pointed star, the name Gina, the year 1921, and some initials. Not necessarily sinister, but unusual details in the context. And like the others in the ravine, these 4 were also found without their shoes.
Okay, let's go back to the undressing. Experienced hikers taking clothes off in freezing weather seems counterintuitive, but you mentioned research points to a known phenomenon.
Yes, it's called paradoxical undressing. It sounds completely illogical, but it's documented in cases of severe hypothermia, perhaps as many as half of fatal cases. As the body's core temperature crashes, the victim can become extremely disoriented.
And they feel hot.
Exactly. The mechanisms aren't perfectly understood, maybe something to do with blood flow changes or brain malfunction, but they experience this intense, sudden sensation of burning heat. And in their confused state, they frantically remove their clothes, believing they're overheating.
Which, of course, just makes things rapidly worse.
Tragically, yes, it seals their fate much faster. So it suggests their final moments weren't rational decisions, but the desperate actions of minds ravaged by extreme cold. And crucially, the toxicology reports found no alcohol in their systems. They weren't drunk.
So the picture we have is panicked flight, inexplicable internal injuries for some, hypothermia, and paradoxical undressing for others. What did the official Soviet investigation make of all this?
The investigation, led by prosecutor Lev Ivanov, was concluded relatively quickly. The official finding was death caused by an unknown, compelling natural force leading to hypothermia.
An unknown, compelling natural force. That sounds incredibly vague.
It is. And that vagueness, combined with the fact that the investigation files were quickly classified and access restricted, immediately fueled suspicion and dissatisfaction. The families were devastated and wanted real answers, but often got evasive responses.
Which, during the Cold War, would just feed into existing mistrust of the government.
Absolutely. The perceived stonewalling, the secrecy, it made people wonder what was being hidden. Was unknown, compelling natural force code for something else? Something the state didn't want known.
So even back then, the fundamental questions were clear. Why flee the tent? What caused those horrific internal injuries without external signs? And the missing tongue, what really happened to Lyudmila Dubinina? These questions have lingered for over 60 years. We've traced the final known steps of the hikers and the baffling details of their discovery. Now we step beyond the immediate evidence to explore one of the most enduring and extraordinary possibilities that what happened on the mountain may not have been a natural event at all, but something human. Or perhaps not.
Right. When conventional explanations seem lacking, the Dyatlov case naturally invites theories from, well, the fringes. And one of the most persistent involves unidentified flying objects, UFOs.
This wasn't just cooked up later either. There were contemporary reports, right? People actually saw strange things in the sky around that time.
There were. Several accounts surfaced, including from prison guards stationed in the Avdel area, not terribly far away. They reported seeing strange lights around the time of the incident, specifically on February 17th, 1959.
What did they describe?
Slow-moving, glowing orbs. They apparently pulsed with light and moved silently across the sky, generally from south to north. Sightings lasted anywhere from 8 to 15 minutes, according to the reports.
And it wasn't just the guards.
No, another hiker, Georgi Atmanaki, who was in a different area earlier that February, also reported seeing similar fire orbs in the general direction of a Torton mountain. And later, Alexander Kolovatov's sister explicitly wondered if these orbs could have been responsible for the group's deaths. It became part of the narrative early on.
Did the official investigator, Lev Ivanov, consider this?
Apparently, the number of these reports made it hard for him to ignore completely. And then there was that photograph from the hiker's own camera.
Ah, yes. Picture 17, the supposed UFO photo.
Exactly. It's a blurry, rather indistinct photo, but it shows this odd sort of octagonal shape against the dark background. For years, many UFO proponents pointed to this as possible photographic evidence.
But hasn't that been explained now?
Yes, more recent analysis, particularly by Donnie Eicher, who wrote a detailed book on the incident, strongly suggests it's actually a camera flare, caused by the shape of the camera's aperture blades when taking a picture in low light, possibly an accidental exposure. It's not likely an external object.
Still, the initial ambiguity, plus that cryptic official finding of an elemental force over which they had no control, kept the UFO theory alive. Some felt the KGB report was deliberately vague.
It certainly allowed room for interpretation, whether intentionally or not. If not aliens, though, the other major non-natural theory points fingers closer to home. The Soviet military.
Secret weapons tests. A cover-up. That certainly fits the Cold War era.
It does. The theory posits that the hikers stumbled into a secret military operation or a test site, saw something they shouldn't have, or were accidentally caught in the effects of a test, leading to a swift and brutal cover-up.
Is there any hard evidence for military activity in that specific area at that time? Some sources mention scrap metal being found.
There are mentions of alleged scrap metal findings during the initial search, which proponents cite as evidence of military debris. However, our research doesn't provide concrete specifics on what exactly was found or confirmed. It remains somewhat anecdotal in the popular retelling.
What about known military activities, like rocket launches?
Well, the USSR was certainly conducting rocket tests in 1959, including in February and March. That's documented. However, the research indicates there's no evidence linking any known test launches directly to the hikers' location on the specific night of February 1st, 2nd. No confirmed sightings of missile trails or impacts that night by other groups or settlements nearby.
So a direct hit seems unlikely based on current evidence. But then there's the radiation. That's harder to dismiss, isn't it?
The radiation findings are definitely one of the most disturbing and concrete pieces of anomalous evidence. Lev himself ordered radiological tests on the hikers' clothes and some internal organs.
And the results were significant.
They were, especially on a brown sweater thought to belong to Kolovatov or Dubinina. It showed radioactivity levels 9,900 decays per minute, nearly double the acceptable limit for people actually working with radioactive materials. Several other clothing items also tested significantly above normal background levels.
Which sounds like strong evidence for exposure to something nuclear or radioactive. A secret weapon. Fallout.
That was the immediate conclusion for many, and it fueled the military cover-up theory for decades. However, more recent analysis offers a more cautious perspective. While elevated, the levels detected are now generally considered low level, not necessarily indicative of being ground zero for a nuclear test or weapon. It could potentially be explained by residual contamination from atmospheric testing elsewhere, remember. This was peak Cold War testing era. Or perhaps contamination from their work or studies. Some students at UPI might have had contact with radioactive isotopes in labs.
And the argument about the Glasnost revelations, how does that fit in?
During the period of increased openness in the late 80s, the Soviet government released files on numerous incidents, including some that were deeply embarrassing, like the Novikirkhask massacre, where troops fired on protesters. The argument some researchers make is, if they were willing to reveal that, why maintain an elaborate multi-decade cover-up specifically for these 9 hikers? A climbing accident, even if triggered by negligence, seems less politically damaging than admitting to massacring citizens. It makes a specific military cover-up, while not impossible, seem less likely to some.
It's a complex picture. What about the sole survivor, Yuri Yudin? He had his own theory, didn't he? A very dark one.
He did. Haunted by the loss of his friends, Yudin later speculated that perhaps armed men, either military or maybe escaped prisoners from a nearby gulag, intercepted the group.
And forced them.
He believed they might have forced the hikers to stage the scene, cut the tent, leave their gear, walk out into the cold, even shred their own clothes, all to mislead investigators. He even suggested Lyudmila Dubinina's missing tongue wasn't animal scavenging, but a deliberate act of punishment, perhaps because she resisted or saw too much.
That's a terrifying scenario. But does it align with the physical evidence?
Unfortunately for Yudin's theory, it clashes with key forensic findings. The tent cuts were definitively made from the inside, which fits a panicked escape, not a staged scene directed by outsiders. And crucially, searchers only ever found the 9 sets of hiker footprints. There was no evidence of additional people, like armed guards or prisoners, being present at the campsite or leading them away.
So his theory, while born from understandable grief and suspicion, doesn't quite match the scene. Any other military-related ideas?
There are variations. One suggests maybe concussive explosions related to mining or geological surveys nearby could have caused a localized shockwave or even triggered a small snowslide or tree fall that hit the tent. Then the people responsible might have covered it up. Another, more extreme theory involves a neurotoxin or gas attack.
Gas attack? That seems very specific.
It is, and definitely on the fringe. This idea proposes the Soviets deployed some kind of chemical agent, perhaps experimental. Some versions even tie it back to UFO lore, suggesting alien technology. The theory goes that the gas caused intense pain, burning sensations, perhaps hallucinations, leading to self-mutilation, clothes removal, and the panicked flight.
And the internal injuries.
Attributed to the effects of the gas or perhaps convulsions or falls caused by it. Proponents sometimes point to other mysterious group deaths, like the Kamar-Daban incident in Siberia in 1993, as possible parallels, suggesting a recurring unknown phenomenon, possibly chemical or biological. It remains highly speculative, though.
The idea of glowing orbs and hidden military experiments paints a chilling picture. But these are not the only strange explanations considered. Now we turn to theories that link the hikers' fear and actions to forces both rare in nature and steeped in legend.
Exactly. If we move away from human or extraterrestrial intervention, we encounter theories focusing on unusual natural phenomena. One of the most scientifically intriguing, though still debated, is the infrasound panic theory.
Infrasound sound waves below the range of human hearing, right? Below about 20 hertz. How could that cause such chaos?
Well, even though you can't hear it in the traditional sense, infrasound can have profound physiological and psychological effects. Research has shown it can induce feelings of intense anxiety, dread, paranoia, confusion, nausea, and just overwhelming discomfort without any obvious cause.
So you feel terrified but not know why.
Precisely. Your body is reacting to this low-frequency vibration, but your conscious mind can't place the source. It could feel like an invisible presence or an impending doom.
And what generates infrasound in nature?
Various things. Powerful storms, earthquakes, volcanic activity, meteors entering the atmosphere, even certain wind conditions interacting with topography. Man-made sources include things like explosions or large industrial fans, and these waves can travel very long distances.
So how does this specifically apply to Dyatlov Pass? Is there a proposed mechanism?
There is. It involves a specific meteorological effect called a Kármán vortex street. This happens when wind flows past an obstacle in a particular way, creating a pattern of swirling vortices, like eddies in a stream but in the air.
And the terrain around the campsite could have created this.
Research by atmospheric scientists looking at the unique shape of Kholat and prominent nearby rock formations like Boot Rock suggests that the conditions on that night, strong winds flowing over that specific topography, could have generated these powerful vortices right near the hiker's tent.
Vortices strong enough to generate infrasound.
Potentially, yes. The theory posits that these swirling air masses with intense internal wind speeds could have produced sustained, localized infrasound. Imagine this invisible, inaudible force bombarding the tent, creating intense physical discomfort and overwhelming psychological terror.
That would certainly explain a sudden, panicked flight from the tent.
It could. The hikers, trapped inside, feeling this intense dread and physical unease, maybe even vibrations, unable to identify the source, might lash out, cut their way out, desperate to escape the unseen thing causing it. The roar of the wind outside would mask any subtle sounds and add to the disorientation.
And the effects might lessen as they moved away from the source.
Exactly. As they descended the slope, moving away from the specific area generating the vortices, the infrasound intensity would decrease, perhaps allowing some semblance of organization, hence the single-file tracks, before hypothermia took over. It's a theory that attempts to explain the bizarre behavior using known physics, even if the conditions required are rare. It aligns intriguingly with Ivanov's unknown compelling force.
A compelling natural explanation, perhaps? Yeah. But then there's the theory that taps into something much more primal, something from local folklore. The Yeti.
Ah, yes. The mink, as the indigenous Mansi people traditionally call them. Large, powerful, ape-like creatures said to inhabit the remote forests of the Urals. This theory suggests the hikers didn't encounter a natural phenomenon or human attackers, but one of these legendary creatures.
Is there anything beyond folklore to support this? Did the hikers mention anything?
Surprisingly, yes, though it's ambiguous. In one of their diaries, there's an entry mentioning vivid discussions about existence of snowmen and noting, latest data show that snowmen dwell at northern Urals around a Ural Mountain.
The snowman, as in a Yeti.
It seems likely that's the reference. Now, was this a serious discussion based on local tales they'd heard, or just a bit of playful banter among the group? We can't know for sure, but the fact they mentioned it adds an uncanny element.
What about physical evidence cited by Yeti proponents?
There were claims, mostly surfacing later, of unusually large clawed footprints found near the site, distinct from bear or wolf tracks common in the area. Also, unsubstantiated accounts from another group supposedly miles away hearing strange, guttural, beastly roars that night.
Highly speculative stuff, though. And what about the photograph again? Picture 17 was sometimes linked to the Yeti, too, wasn't it?
It was. Some interpretations saw the blurry shape not as a UFO, but as the figure of a creature lurking in the darkness. But again, the photographic analysis points strongly towards it being a technical artifact, a lens flare, not an image of a Yeti.
So the Yeti theory relies heavily on folklore, ambiguous diary entries, and unconfirmed reports. It certainly adds to the mystique, though.
It absolutely does. The idea of confronting such a creature in that desolate landscape taps into very deep-seated fears. It provides a monster to explain the terror and the violence.
As with every episode, we entertain the possibilities. But if you're familiar with our episodes, This is the part where we return to the evidence. This is where the science has its say.
And in the Dyatlov case, recent scientific reexamination has focused heavily on a theory that was initially dismissed: an avalanche.
Right. For years, people said an avalanche wasn't possible there. The slope wasn't steep enough, and there were no obvious signs, like a big pile of debris or a clear fracture line where the snow broke away.
Exactly. The average slope angle where the tent was pitched was only about 23 degrees, generally considered below the threshold for dangerous slab avalanches, which usually require slopes closer to 30 degrees or more. Plus, the search party arriving almost a month later didn't report seeing classic avalanche signs.
But a 2021 study challenged that, didn't it, using new methods?
It did, quite significantly. Researchers Johan Gohm and Alexander Pozerin used sophisticated computer modeling, the kind used in modern avalanche forecasting and even animation, like in the movie Frozen, combined with historical weather data and topographical analysis.
And what did their models show?
They found something crucial about the specific spot where the tent was pitched. While the average slope was gentle, the actual ground underneath the snowpack, right where they camped, had irregularities. There were localized sections that were significantly steeper, reaching up to 30 degrees.
So the critical angle was present, just hidden by the overlying snow.
Precisely. Later snowfall had smoothed the surface, concealing these steeper pitches. Their models showed that the weak layer within the snowpack, the layer prone to failure, was sitting on an average slope of about 28 degrees in that specific zone. That dramatically increases the likelihood of a slab avalanche.
What kind of avalanche are we talking about? A huge wall of snow.
Not necessarily. Their model suggested it was likely a relatively small, delayed-release slab avalanche. Slab means a cohesive block of snow sliding at once. Delayed means it might not have triggered immediately when they cut into the slope to pitch the tent, but perhaps later that night due to wind-loading wind piling up more snow on the slab or temperature changes.
And a smaller slab would explain the lack of obvious debris.
Yes. The specific conditions, according to their model, would have limited the volume of snow released. It wouldn't necessarily leave a massive, easily identifiable debris field or fracture line, especially after nearly 4 weeks of wind and further snowfall before the search party arrived. Later drone mapping confirmed these hidden steeper sections, adding real-world validation to the model.
Okay, so a small, delayed slab avalanche hits the tent. How does that explain the rest of the bizarre details? Let's start with the severe internal injuries of the 4 found in the ravine.
A slab avalanche, even a relatively small one, carries immense force. It's like being hit by a concrete block. The models show that the impact of such a slab could absolutely deliver the kind of blunt force trauma seen in the crushed ribs, the fractured skull, without necessarily causing major external wounds. The snow acts like a distributed wheat.
And being found in the ravine.
The initial impact could have incapacitated them, perhaps broken bones. They might have been pushed or stumbled into the ravine during the chaos, or maybe a snow bridge they sought shelter under later collapsed under their weight or shifting snow, leading to a fatal fall that caused or compounded those injuries.
What about the frantic escape? The cuts from inside the tent?
Imagine the terror. Suddenly, the tent is hit by a mass of snow. It's collapsing, heavy, maybe blocking the entrance. Panic sets in. Cutting your way out becomes the fastest option to escape being buried or crushed. It's pure survival instinct.
And the footprints. The calm, single-file descent after that panic.
Calm might be a misinterpretation of the tracks. After the initial terror of escaping the tent, they find themselves outside in a blizzard, disoriented, freezing. Their training likely kicked in, regroup, assess, move towards shelter, the tree line. So the single-file prints might represent not calmness, but a desperate, organized attempt to move together, conserve energy, and find safety, even while hypothermia was starting to affect them.
Which leads us to the paradoxical undressing and the hypothermia deaths.
Once they fled the tent, inadequately dressed into those lethal temperatures, hypothermia would have set in rapidly. The confusion, disorientation, and then that cruel trick of the mind, paradoxical undressing, feeling hot when freezing, explains why they shed vital layers. It tragically accelerated their death from exposure, which claimed 6 of the 9.
And the missing tongue. The scavengers.
For the bodies found much later, in May, after the thaw had begun, animal scavenging is the most logical and common explanation for missing soft tissues like the tongue, eyes, or lips. Small predators and scavengers foxes, maybe even birds would have been active and would target these areas first. It's a grim detail, but entirely consistent with bodies left exposed in the wilderness for months.
Finally, the radiation. How does the avalanche theory account for that?
It doesn't need to, directly. The avalanche theory explains the cause of death and the immediate events. The radiation is seen as a separate, potentially coincidental factor. As discussed, the low levels are more likely linked to background contamination from atmospheric testing common in that era, or perhaps some prior contact with radioactive materials through their studies or work, rather than being directly linked to the fatal event itself. It's an anomaly, but likely not the trigger.
So putting it all together, the scientific consensus, or at least this very compelling recent research, points towards a natural tragedy.
It strongly suggests that a confluence of specific, perhaps rare, natural factors, the hidden steep slope, the wind conditions, the delayed slab avalanche, combined with the known physiological effects of extreme cold and hypothermia, provides a coherent, evidence-based explanation for most, if not all, of the baffling elements of the Dyatlov Pass incident.
It paints a picture not of monsters or conspiracies, but of the immense and sometimes deceptive power of nature itself.
Precisely. While the fringe theories capture the imagination, the science points towards the chilling reality that the environment itself, under the right specific conditions, can become the unknown, compelling force. The combination of the avalanche impact, the panicked escape, the disorientation, and the swift onset of lethal hypothermia creates a plausible narrative for that tragic night.
Even with advanced scientific analysis and a more open investigative environment today, the complete truth of that terrifying night, the exact sequence of events, and the full scope of the hiker's fear will likely remain forever etched in the snowy depths of the Ural Mountains. It stands as a haunting testament to nature's raw power and enduring mystery, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous unknowns are the forces we cannot see or predict. It leaves us with an unsettling question. How do we truly prepare for the moments when the very environment we seek to conquer turns against us with a power we can barely comprehend? That's it for today's journey beyond the known. If the call of the unknown speaks to you, liking, subscribing, and following helps more than you might imagine. And if you'd like to take your exploration further and truly help us keep uncovering these stories, consider becoming a member. With Vault Access or Secret Passage, you'll get early access to episodes, our audiobook Underground, and a collection of carefully curated wonders waiting just for you.